Greetings from Miller Park in Milwaukee. I'm Greg Hofer. My next guest has called big league baseball games for nearly 20 years for the Milwaukee Brewers, the Florida Marlins, and now entering his 12th year with the Chicago Cubs. He's a music enthusiast who has hosted the Green Bay Packers radio network pregame and halftime shows. He is Len Kasper. Len, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Greg. Good to be with you.
Grew up in Michigan, born and raised in Mount Pleasant, a couple hours from Detroit. What was it like growing up in Mount Pleasant? Obviously a college town, about 30,000 folks.
Yeah, you know, I like to tell people I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Obviously, we were a few hours from Detroit. We'd get down to Tiger Stadium, maybe once a year. Caught a couple Red Wings games, some Pistons games. I saw maybe 3 or 4 Lions games at the old Silver Dome. But by and large, I just watched games on television, listened to games on radio. And when I grew up, not every game was on television. So you get 3 or 4 a week, maybe, game of the week. When WGN was on our cable, I was probably 11 or 12 years old. Would come home every day after school and watch Harry and Steve Stone. The TBS crew, I'd watch a lot of their games because they were on every day. And I was very influenced by all of that, and I just thought that would be a really cool job. Listening to Ernie Harwell, Paul Carey do Tiger games. I would try to see if I could get other stations from out of town on the AM dial when I could. So it's a very different experience, I think, for baseball fans and sports fans in general growing up today, because everything is available, versus 20, 30 years ago when the game of the week kind of meant a little bit more. But I wouldn't trade it for anything, and very happy with the way everything has gone.
We kind of grew up in the same era. I remember growing up in the UP, and we would listen and watch Tiger games.
Sure.
George Kell, Al Kaline, great broadcasting team. And we'd have to go outside and actually turn the antenna to get the, I grew up in Upper Michigan, so it was a little bit of a reach. We pulled a station out of Traverse City, but I'm sure great influences in Michigan. You mentioned Ernie and Paul, but also, George and Al, great influence on you, I'm sure.
They were great, and I probably didn't even realize how great they were as players for a few years, because when you're a kid, they're the broadcasters. Then you find out later, oh, wait a minute, they're both Hall of Fame players. I was fortunate later on when I went to Marquette here in Milwaukee and came out to County Stadium all the time, got to meet all those guys. They were all incredibly nice to me, and that meant the world to me. And I got to know Ernie pretty well over the years in the last couple of decades of his life. And as great a broadcaster as he was a better human being. And there are definitely a lot of moments along the way where you kind of think, okay, how would Ernie have handled this? And I think about him all the time.
Yeah, he was fantastic. So then after high school, you head off, you go to Marquette. You come to the big city. What was it about Marquette that appealed to you?
Well, I liked the fact that it was in a big league market. I ended up interning in the public relations department of the Bucks my freshman year. It was, I think, the second year of the Bradley Center, so that was huge for me. I liked the Jesuit mission, the urban environment. And Milwaukee was a huge transition for me because I was from a very rural area. Now living in Chicago, Milwaukee doesn't seem quite as big, but at the time when you're 18 years old and you're not used to urban life, it was a big deal. But I think it was very good for me to get here to Milwaukee. I got to know a lot of the media people here right off the bat. Did some student radio at Marquette with a lot of the college basketball games. And then the Bucks internship, I got to hang around. That was the golden era, right? The end of the 80s. It was Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Isaiah Thomas and those great Pistons teams. And the Bucks had Sidney Moncrief and Jack Sikma and Paul Pressey, and I think Kareem was still playing at that time. I mean, it was a great era to be around the NBA.
And you kind of cut your teeth here in Milwaukee. You did a lot of different things. You did some morning anchoring. You did the Packers stuff, some Brewer fill-in work. Great opportunity for you right out of college, basically.
Yeah, it really was. My first full-time job in radio was at WTMJ starting in 1994. And I did a little bit of everything. I did morning sports. I did afternoon sports on Jonathan Green's show. I did the 2-hour sports talk show with Dennis Krause, who was a big influence on me here as well. And that kind of coincided with the great Golden Packer era, Brett Favre and Mike Holmgren and Ron Wolf. So those days I think of very fondly. And I actually ran into Ron Wolf this spring. He was with Walt Jocketty down at spring training, and I hadn't seen Ron in a long time, and I went over and I said hello, and he remembered who I was, and it was pretty cool to run into him.
And then from there, you head off to the Sunshine State. You get a job with the Marlins, your first real big break in big league baseball.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. There were a few jobs open at that time, including the Brewer job. Darren Sutton got that job. I applied for his job, which was the #2 radio gig in Anaheim, and I was a finalist for that and didn't get it. And then the Marlins job opened really late, end of February into March. So every team was already at spring training, and I got the job on March 6th of that year. And I think I got the job on a Wednesday, and I had to be down in Florida by Saturday. And so my wife and our son, who wasn't even a year old, they had to kind of commute back and forth that summer. So it was crazy, but it was great. And then the following year, the Marlins won the World Series, which was thrilling to chronicle. And then 2 years after that, the Cubs job opened, and here I am.
Yeah, the Marlin team, the year that won it, obviously had Dontrell Willis, Miguel Cabrera, I mean, former Cub Derek Lee. Had to be a fun time to be down with the Marlins.
It was the little team that could. They beat the Giants in the first round. They were not favored. They beat the Cubs in the NLCS. They were not favored. Then they beat the Yankees in the World Series, and they were not favored in that one either. They won the final 3 games of all 3 of those series, and it was magic in a bottle for sure. If you go back and look, as you mentioned some of those names, Mike Lowell, Alex Gonzalez, Juan Encarnacion, Chad Fox, Uget Urbina, Brad Penny, Josh Beckett. I mean, these are guys who had really good major league careers, and some of them were very early on in their career. Pudge Rodriguez showed up for 1 year and was fantastic. So it was a real fun ride.
And then you return to the Midwest, like you said, here with the Cubs. Now your 12th year. In the Cubs broadcasting tradition, probably second to none. Jack Brickhouse, Harry Carey, Pat Hughes, Tom Brenneman, Josh Lewin, even Ronald Reagan.
That's right. Back in the day, the recreations, for sure.
So, yeah, it's got to be pretty neat to be calling Cubs games back in the Midwest.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I'd like to finish my career here if I can. It's not always in my control, but if I have any say in the matter, I'll do Cubs games until they won't have me anymore. But I've been very fortunate. I've worked with 2 wonderful partners, Bob Brenly for the first 8 years, and Jim DeShays and I have now been together for the last 4. We have a lot of fun every day on the air. We have a great ownership group, best fans in the world. I think Cub fans remind me a lot of Packer fans. They do have a little bit of an America's team kind of vibe going on, and yeah, it's kind of a happy, sometimes dysfunctional family, because when the team loses 1 or 2 games, it feels like the world's coming to an end, but they ride that emotional roller coaster, and it tells you that Cubs baseball matters a lot to people's lives every single day, and I take that responsibility of being someone who chronicles that very, very seriously.
You mentioned your 2 partners, Bob Brenly, former big league catcher, Jim DeShays, a former big league pitcher. A couple of pretty unique perspectives that they would obviously bring to the game. It's got to be fun sitting next to those.
No question. Bob, not only a former catcher, but a former World Series winning manager, so brought a lot to the table. And JD's the first former pitcher I've worked with regularly, and on top of that, he's left-handed. So he's quirky, he's intellectually curious, he doesn't feel like he knows everything, and he and I kind of teach each other things every day. He loves to laugh, he loves to joke around, and you have to be able to do that when you're calling games every single day. It's a long season, even when you have a good season.
And you've seen it from both sides. In your 12 years with the Cubs, you had 5 straight losing seasons. Now you currently sit with the best record in baseball. How does that affect your broadcasting game plan, strategy, approach, going from a bad team to now a good team?
I think I kind of go back to Ernie Harwell. He was the most influential broadcaster in terms of my style. And the thing I always loved about Ernie was he was the same every day. Whether the Tigers were great or awful, or whether the game was great or awful, he kind of did the same thing every day. And my thought is, when the team is bad, you have to be good and be entertaining and keep people listening and watching. When the team is good, you don't need to overhype it. So, not that I downplay how good the Cubs are, but I don't need to go over the top to tell people how good they are. And when the team is struggling, I don't need to bludgeon them with how bad the team is either. We don't want it to be a funeral, we want it to be fun. So my thing is, no matter what the record is, no matter what the weather is or the date, we show up every day hoping to call a great ball game. And again, every day I go to the park, I pinch myself and say, I can't believe I'm here every day.
Now lastly, I know you have a love of music. Where did that love come from?
Probably my mom. I think I grew up listening to a lot of her records, the Beatles and the Stones and the Monkees and all the 60s groups. And then when I was a junior and senior in high school, I worked at an oldies radio station in Mount Pleasant and got to know all of that era's music. And so that's kind of how I started to get into music. And then eventually I kind of got into the modern world a little bit when I went to college. And for whatever reason, music's always just been a fun hobby for me. I love to go to concerts. Love to listen to music when I go out for my run on a daily basis, and kind of gets me away from the rest of the world.
And about a month ago, you were a part of Hot Stove Cool Music, the 5th annual with Theo Epstein.
Yeah.
How'd that event go for you?
Amazing. I got to play a couple songs with Eddie Vedder, and I still can't believe it. It feels surreal to me. Eddie's a huge Cub fan, and he watches all of our games and sends us notes all the time about the Cubs. And it's kind of a mutual admiration society, I guess, in that he loves the Cubs, and I love Pearl Jam, and I love music, so it works out well for both of us.
A couple of quick ones. Most memorable 7th inning stretch singer that's come into Wrigley?
Well, Eddie's great. One who stands out to me is Ron Howard, a big Andy Griffith and Happy Days fan, and he's had an incredible career as a director. He was incredibly gracious. I think we had him in shortly after Andy Griffith had died, so he told us a lot of great stories about Andy Griffith and Don Knotts. Tim Robbins once sang the stretch, and I think we had a 25-minute top of the 7th, so he had to very patiently wait in the booth, and he could not have been better about it. We've had a lot of great ones. We've had a lot of weird ones. We've had a lot of memorable ones, but I always usually enjoy the ex-Cubs or fans of the Cubs.
And I always enjoy this. Your favorite road ballpark, obviously Wrigley's #1, but your favorite road ballpark that you go to?
They're all great. I love coming to Miller Park. I would probably say AT&T Park in San Francisco is my favorite. Incredible atmosphere, right on the water, and Cubs and Giants. There just always seems to be a lot of electricity in the ballpark.
You don't like the nosebleeds at Nationals Park?
That one's, the park's fine. We're so far away. It's hard to sometimes see the field.
Len, thanks so much for your time. It's greatly appreciated.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you.
That's Len Kasper, the television voice of the Chicago Cubs. We'll see you next time. I'm Greg Hofer.